Greetings, friends. With me today is Alex Krainer. A man I've tried to get on the program for a while, but it's been my fault that things keep getting messed up. Alex, thank you very much for your patience. And today you're on the
Pleasure.
program to discuss your article, which I was really fascinated by. It is called The Power Behind the Throne and the Forever Wars, which is on your Substack. So it's alexkrainer.substack.com if you want to donate. Why did I find this so fascinating? Because this is kind of a question I get asked a lot, and I don't really have an answer. So you kind of go into people like Liz Truss saying she didn't really have any power to control things, George Bush saying the same thing. What is sort of this whole situation with world leaders who, in theory, have power, complaining that they can't do anything? Is that just a normal part of the separation of powers in democracy, or is it something more sinister?
No, it's definitely something more sinister because the separation of power is meant to be legitimate between the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch, right? All very clearly, transparently defined, regulated, enforced under transparent democratic control. This is something else. This is something that we've been suspecting all along. I mean, like anybody who pays attention would have to conclude that our leaders are completely insane or that they are pursuing a very different agenda from that one which is being advertised and that one which is being demanded by the democratic will of the people. Mm-hmm. So since, most of the people in charge are not insane, they're competent people, mm-hmm. even if they're not well-meaning, then you have to reach the conclusion that the agendas they are pursuing are not what we believe that they are and what we elected them for. And that implies that there's a power behind the throne that is running things for their own purposes. And that's obvious, because, people in the West, through their exercise of their democratic power, they always demand peace. People very seldom explicitly vote for war candidates.
Yeah.
American
I would say
people
almost never.
almost never. It has to be some kind of a national emergency, like in Israel today, where people are super scared of something, and then they want that threat to be removed one way or another, and then they press for more war and more confrontation. But generally, the American people have always voted for anti-war candidates.
Yeah, you know what? As someone who lives overseas, I have to try to. Sometimes I have trouble convincing people that, but it's true. The anti-war candidate always wins. But now Russians should notice because Zelensky was an anti-war candidate too.
Exactly. But then somehow, by some black magic, in spite of us always voting against war, we always get more war. So what does that tell you? That tells you that somebody else is running the show for reasons that are not explained to us properly. And so this is something that you could have picked up on probably for more than a century going back. And when people like Liz Truss run their mouths, that you get the corroboration of this suspicion from the person who was there, person who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who comes out and tell you, oh my gosh, when I got to the top of the tree, as she says, I realized that I wasn't holding the levers of power, that the levers of power were held by the Bank of England. Mm-hmm. It's the bankers. So that's another thing that if you pay attention, you realize.
Let me just jump in because we talk a lot about in many alternative media podcasts about the power of the bankers. But how does this look? I mean, are we talking like sort of the cartoonish mafia of the 1930s, where someone quietly tells Liz Truss, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, we'll physically hurt you or worse? Or is it something like, well, we'll cut funding and that'll cause England to collapse and you'll get the blame? How does this mechanism look like,
Well, I think that to use the expression that they like to use is that all options are on the table. So somebody who's very pliable or even an ally of these interests they don't need a whole lot of persuasions. They can just be told like, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to do what we tell you. And they're going to say like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe Liz Truss is an example. Maybe Justin Trudeau in Australia is an example. Maybe Joe Biden is an example of a person who has his interests completely aligned with these global oligarchies. And then you have, on the other extreme, you have people like Abraham Lincoln or John F. Kennedy or a number of other prominent leaders in the West who ended up getting the lead. It's like you can choose the lead or you can choose the silver. So some people choose the silver. Those who choose the lead get the lead, and so it's like a whole range of options of how to control. And I think that Donald Trump, he didn't get the lead, but he got a whole lot of lawfare wielded against him to this day. Mm-hmm. And so that's all happening, and I think you're completely right to say that at the very top of the pyramid of this control and command hierarchy, it's the mafia business. It's the power plays. It's not the rule of law. It's exactly mafia style management of the control network.
Well, then maybe you could actually help me with one question that I sort of get confronted with again because I talk about Russia very often, is that Russia's kind of a weird case, right? Because Russia has one of those private central banks, right, that seems to be one of the great sources of evil on our planet. But then the war against the West starts, and for the most part, the private central bank here went along and did its job. A lot of people thought that they'd, specifically try to secretly sink the Russian economy or something. So does this mean, has Putin somehow, defeated these people, at least on the territory of Russia, or there's some sort of mutual agreement, or is this whole world of bankers maybe not as monolithic as it might seem? How is this possible?
It's possible because ultimately what counts is who has the monopoly on dishing out the violence, who controls the leg breakers. And so let's say I've heard allegations that the Rothschilds own the controlling interest in the Bank of Russia. And that may be the case. I don't know. But it doesn't matter, because if they give orders to Elvira Nabiullina, and Vladimir Putin says no, you will not carry out those orders, he prevails because he controls the leg breakers, and she has to obey him. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, he can replace her. Yeah. He can demand her resignation, and she'll have to give it to him. So she has to obey him, not the legal owners, if the case is that the Rothschilds own the controlling interest. In the West, it's different. It's these same oligarchies that control ultimately the leg breakers, because these are the people who will assassinate presidents if necessary. These are the people. I don't know if you remember. I think about 3 years ago there was a famous court case in the United States of a money laundering case against the Deutsche Bank related to Jeffrey Epstein. And it was assigned to the judge whose name was Esther Salas. Well, she's still around. Mm-hmm. And she apparently also didn't take the silver. So somebody dispatched an assassin to her house. Oh. And it was obviously a hit job, because after the assassin failed his assignment, so he didn't kill her, he killed her son and wounded her husband. She survived because she randomly went out to run some errand. And then the assassin was shortly thereafter found dead, from an apparent suicide.
Oh, that's a classic one. Killing the assassin.
That's a classic one, because these assassins, they're then overcome with remorse, and then they suicide themselves with 3 shots in the back of the head.
I see. Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah, so but
what was the name of this judge? Where was this at?
Her name was Esther Salas.
Salas. Uh-huh.
SALAS. And this was in, I think it was in New York.
Well, I'll have to look that one up after this. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and so this happens all the time. It doesn't get a whole lot of traction in the media because the media would rather us not know about these things and believe that we live in some kind of a Perry Mason world of law and order where anybody can take anybody else to court and an impartial judge or a jury of their peers is going to weigh the pros and cons on the case and decide on its merit.
The counter to that could be, the counter to that could be that they've waged a lot of lawfare against Trump, but recently he's come up with some big wins, especially kind of getting himself back on the ballot there. So does that mean that the system works, or does that mean that Trump also represents some sort of very powerful force that just happens to be weaker than the banker force or something like that?
Yeah, I believe that Donald Trump is backed by some kind of a power network, and this power network is, on their back foot. They don't control all the levers of power, but let's say that they probably understand how the system works. I think that they understand where they have to apply pressure to prevail. And then, the oligarchies, the bankers' system of control and command is not, it's not made of kryptonite. It still is, how do you call it? It's a going concern in the sense that, they need, like it's like a ship. You need to man it. You need to manage it, and every so often you're going to have a rogue on board, and then every so often they have to put pressure on judges, on lawyers. Every so often they have to get somebody out one way or another. I think that the case of Justice Scalito in the Supreme Court was a case where it was necessary to kill the man. Various cases of bizarre rulings by Justice Roberts was pretty much evidence that he is somehow they are able to apply pressure on him to rule against his better judgment. And so you can, if you pay attention, you can see these things. You can't say who exactly is applying the pressure, where the pressure is ultimately coming from. Is it coming from John Podesta or Barack Obama or Susan Rice, or is it coming from JP Morgan, or is it coming from Federal Reserve? Or, that's not so easy to establish. It would be extremely difficult to work that out.
Maybe the pressure isn't clear, but then could you maybe enlighten us? Do you have any idea who are these forces that are for Trump, besides like the common masses? I mean, like the wealth, sort of the counter elite. I guess I'm asking you, who are the counter of the elite of the Western world who seem to be happy to work with Trump?
Well, the elite, it would be very hard for me to say that, but it could be anybody, because, throughout history, we have to part with this notion that anybody who's a millionaire is going to be on board with all the other billionaires, because throughout history, we had one example after another where people from the aristocratic classes actually were reformers of the systems. Like, in the Roman Empire, you had the Gracchi brothers, Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus. They were both of patrician lineage. They were both aristocrats, but they all saw that Rome was on the road to perdition, that it was going to, if Rome continued on the same trajectory, that it would fail, that it would collapse ultimately. And so they wanted to reform the system, but in reforming the system, they were jeopardizing the interests of other oligarchs, and they had them killed. And same case was Julius Caesar. And so, throughout history, you had many examples of people who simply had a different point of view about where the whole system was going. And so you have, on the one hand, you have oligarchies who don't care, who just want to defend their privilege at all cost, even if the whole country collapses. And then you see the others who see their interest aligned with the country because, they don't necessarily want to be poor, but they want to be in the privileged position in a rich, stable, wealthy, prosperous country, rather than so they then might want to rally around somebody like Trump, who might be a reformer, and support him and back him in all kinds of ways. So
they kind of see that the American ship is sinking and they don't want to go down with the ship, basically.
Exactly. And they want to save the ship, whereas maybe you have other oligarchs who say, we don't care, the ship can sink, we're gonna take the lifeboats for ourselves, and we're gonna infect a different host. Maybe we're gonna take our interests to Europe, or we're gonna take our interests to India or China, wherever we can infect the body politic of that nation, and we carry on. And then other people maybe are more patriotic, and they see their interests aligned with the rest of the country, and they want to save the ship from sinking.
Now, I know your time is very limited today, but on the topic of carrying on, in your article, the title of the article being "The Power Behind the Throne and the Forever Wars" at alexkrainer.substack.com, which everyone can go to right now. You mentioned that after breaking Ukraine, they'll use European nations next. So what exactly did you mean by that? And how can, one of the problems with NATO expansion is, since where NATO expands, basically the nuclear umbrella expands with it. So after Ukraine, there's basically Moldova, and then that's kind of it. What else can they actually throw at the Russians? Or were you talking about something completely different?
No, I was talking about something completely different. So here's my fear. Well, not fear, my concern. You know how Ukraine was not an anti-Russian nation. Mm-hmm. People of Ukraine, in their majority, were not anti-Russian at all. Mm-hmm. In 2014, the Pravi sector and the Svoboda Party combined got 1.6% of the vote.
Wow!
Right? They were very marginal. And then even as late as 2019, Volodymyr Zelensky got 73% of the vote. Not because he was promising war with Russia, but quite the opposite. He was promising normalization of relationships with Russia. He was promising peace with Ukraine, with Eastern Ukraine, re-legalization of Russian language, and this is what people asked for.
Yeah.
But somehow, 5 years later, the country is broken. 500,000 Ukrainians have been sacrificed, and now they basically lost the country. How did that happen? Against the democratic wishes of the people of their country. So, as I've looked into the historical precedents for this, and I see that there's like a social technology being applied of how, it's almost like a scientific process of how to Nazify and militarize a nation. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So first you immiserate the target nation. You destroy their economy. You cause very high youth unemployment. You make it so that people are poor, that young people cannot realize their aspirations. They have no money to, have homes and raise their families. And then you start introducing this, first of all, the myth of the glorious nation, mm-hmm. And you also start pointing your finger to the enemy. So you say like, oh my God, look, everything is shit here.
Because
and the reason is
this group of people.
Because of this group. And for Ukraine,
that is the key thing. And if we just get rid of that group of people,
if we kill those, exactly. And so for Ukraine, it was the Muscovite Jewish mafia, right? That mm-hmm. was the designated enemy. So it was necessary to fight Russia. And then in Russia, in Germany in the 1930s, the exact same process was unfolding. This time the enemy was communism and Bolshevism, again, pointing the finger at Russia as the as a designated enemy that was guilty for everything that was wrong in Germany at the time. And so what happens is the young people then feel the call to, to defend their nation. They feel that it's up to them to set historical wrongs right, and then you start even funding these organizations. So, in Germany you had brown shirts, right? Who in 1930 there was just like a few hundred of them, 200-300 of them.
Yeah.
By 1933, when Hitler came to power, there was between 2 and 3 million of them. Okay. And so, this doesn't happen just like that. Somebody has to pay for this. Somebody has to fund this.
Absolutely.
So you have these completely disenfranchised young men who are now given like an inspirational call to rescue their nation, to vanquish their enemies. And not only that, that gives them a certain status in society, and that gives them a source of income, because now they're actually earning something, and they're rescuing the nation. And so what you get is these, Azov battalions type people. You get these, C-14 groups and so on, and all these thugs that then they think that they are the carriers of the nation's historical mission, and that everybody else is a wobbly scaredy cat couch potato. And then they despise, as much as they hate their enemies, they also despise their own countrymen. So they have no trouble.
That is definitely visible in Ukraine with
exactly
the way they treated their own population. And the weird thing is that at the beginning of the war, there was initially a preference to sort of grab people who are ethnic Hungarians, Romanians, and of course Russians. But at this point, they just don't seem to. That's one of the bizarre things about Nazism, is it's sort of on the one hand rooted in this supposedly patriotic idea, yet it always leads to the destruction of said group.
Yes.
In the end, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry I interrupted you there.
Exactly. No, so, you have this process that then somehow swept the whole of Ukraine into this self-destructive war against Russia. And, something happens once, because once the Russians launch this special military operation, then all the bets are off, because then even people who were against war now switch sides in large percentages, because it becomes almost tribal.
Yeah.
Like at this point, like it's almost like you're supporting your football club.
Yeah.
You feel you identify with that group and against the other ones. And maybe you were totally against the war, but now the war has been forced on you. And then you close ranks with your group and the whole nation goes to war. People don't ask anymore, is it right? Is it wrong? Who orchestrated this? Where is this coming from? Now it's time to fight the war. And so this is how Ukraine was kind of dragged by the nose into a war that they didn't want. And now my concern is, going back to your question, is that the same process has been started in Europe. So we have already the process of deindustrialization well underway. European nations like Germany, Poland, Italy, France, they're all being pushed into deep structural economic crises. Poverty rates are increasing. So again, you're going to find high levels of unemployment, a lot of youth unemployment, young men who have no venues to realize their aspirations. And then you're going to start telling them that it's all Vladimir Putin, that it's all the Russians, that everything will be utopia once we kill Russia. And then you start these little Nazi groups, which are being started. You can see them parading in Germany, in Sweden, in Finland, in many countries. There are these little new brown shirt movements. Yeah. And who knows, maybe in a few years' time, what's a couple of hundred men today could be a couple of million men tomorrow. And then they themselves can start thinking like, oh, we are there to rescue Europe. We are there to right the historical wrongs, and so on and so forth. And they might also develop a healthy contempt for their less convinced, less determined countrymen, and they might be happy to forcefully shove them into the trenches on the Eastern Front. And so, this process is not going to happen overnight, but we've already taken steps in direction of this process happening. The immiseration of the nations, the start of the formation of these neo-Nazi groups. And so if we're not extremely careful, we might find ourselves back in the 1930s when, countries like Germany and Poland and Finland and Sweden and Romania and Moldova, they might all start to get mobilized for a great war between Europe and Russia.
Now, what could, last question, because I know you have to leave, but what could Russia do about this? Or is there nothing they can do?
Well, Russia has to prevail in Ukraine, first of all. And then I think that Russia has to continue working the diplomatic tack with the rest of the world to make sure that these things don't happen. I think that, when we talk about what can Russia do, Russia has to defend itself. Russia has to protect its interest. But I think that we have to, on the Western side, we have to be sure to speak out clearly and boldly and with the determination, because as a father, my greatest concern is that my kids might end up one day like those young men being shoved into the trenches on the Eastern Front in Ukraine. Because if they do the same in Europe, then where does it stop? We might, like those graves with hundreds of Ukrainian flags on top of them.
Yeah.
All of that could be one day our flags and our children. So I think we have to look at things as they are. We have to reject propaganda. We have to reject any notion that our enemies are in Russia or in China or in Iran, that we have to go fight an external enemy. And we have to understand that our enemies are at home. And we have to confront them, and we have to disenfranchise them rather than them disenfranchising us.
All right. Alex Krainer, thank you very much for your time. Powerful words. Anyways, check out his Substack. You guys know where to find me. Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore on Telegram. Signing out.